Konomopoulos, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling and Educational Psychology. And my background, I've taught in other counselor preparation programs too. I taught at UTRGV for 3 years, and I also taught at A&M Kingsville. And now I've been blessed with the opportunity to be teaching and working here. So it's been great. And a lot of what I'm going to show is going to be based off of counseling research, but I'm going to do my best to make it relevant to other fields of study as well. So the hope of this presentation is really to cover as much as we can the methods section and the results section of writing a manuscript, particularly with quantitative research. And so the methods section, so there's a lot that we can cover regarding the methods section. And because right now we're a small group, I'm happy for us to just kind of make it conversational, Alexandra, and hopefully that will be helpful too for those who watch the recording. So here are 7 important areas that we're gonna touch on regarding the methods section. Some of this actually begins before the methods section. So we're going to talk about how we will address our research aims, setting up our methods section, and then setting up our research questions or hypotheses. So depending on your study, you may choose to have research questions or you may choose to have hypotheses. And then following that, we're going to talk about more in depth how to write your participants section. That's a subsection within the methods section. And then it's also important to include the location. And then you have a procedure section. And then we have a measures or instrumentation section, which we're going to talk about for whatever instruments you might include in your study. And then we'll talk about various data analyses that people might run in their study too. And so can I ask you, Alexandra, have you thought of any studies already for, like, are you already working on your dissertation?
Somewhat. We are in our previous class. We have 2 dissertation research classes. The last classes in the program, and in the first one, we pretty much worked on identifying the type of questions in the research that we will be doing. So yes, I do have an idea. I'm thinking that my research question will be driven rather maybe by qualitative, but I don't want to exclude anything. I would like to know about quantitative as well, because we'll see which way it's going to go.
Right, sounds good, sounds good. Well, there's a lot of different approaches that you can take. So within the realm of quantitative research, we're really going to cover 3 major areas. So you can propose a survey research.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. It looks like we have one more student on here. Her name is Rebecca. I don't know if you can see that when you're sharing, but just so you know.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I see now. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. How are you doing?
I am good, thanks. I'm looking forward to this. So.
Good. Yeah, we're a small group today, so that's good though, because it'll give us the opportunity to ask questions, and we can have a discussion about any research studies that y'all are interested in working on. So, could you tell me, Rebecca, a little bit about like your field of study? Are you a doctoral student?
So I'm kind of a weird student in a certain way. I already have a doctorate, but it is in management. However, I am at pursuing a master's degree in accountancy, right? And I need to be doing research in accountancy, right, for my career goals. So I need a refresh, right, on my research kind of skills and write-up so that I can be applying them in my field of accounting. So.
Oh, okay, sounds good. Thank you for sharing that. What I'm going to be covering is quantitative research methods in more of the social sciences, like counseling or education, and then I'll be covering some examples of research studies, and I'll be focusing a lot on the methods section and the results section. And the writing style of our profession in the counseling field is the APA format 7th edition right now, which is an excellent book. And Alexandra, I'd encourage you, I'm sure you have this book already. This has really great examples in it about writing a method section, writing a results section, writing a discussion section, writing a literature review. And I know you're saying that about comps. So it's a lot of good stuff. But yeah, so with quantitative research, there's a lot of different quantitative approaches that you can take. There's survey research, there's correlational research, and within correlational research, you've got regression, which looks at, looking at maybe predicting variables. And then with experimental research, that's where we're really looking at like group differences. You've got true experimental, quasi-experimental, and non-experimental. And so I can go into some of the basics of that. But if you're formulating an idea for a research study, then you would probably find yourself probably drawn to one of these three major areas in quantitative research. And so we'll get more so to the nuances of that. So before you get to your method section, you start out with your introduction, right? And you've got your introduction, and you got your literature review. And you'll notice that most literature reviews kind of have that upside down triangle where they start real broad, and then they end up kind of narrowing down to the main point of what it is that you're going to be really studying, right? And essentially your purpose statement and statement of the problem kind of come at the end of the literature review. They are mentioned in the introduction, towards the end of the introduction, and then they're kind of repeated again at the end of the literature review. And that's where also in the purpose statement, you're going to most likely either mention your research questions or your hypotheses. And so what is that? That's a statement that identifies the phenomenon to be studied. And so you might have a research question like, what is the effectiveness of a study skills group for improving academic achievement amongst adolescents, right? So that might be something that essentially you're going to be narrowing it all down to. And then hypotheses, this is where, of course, you sort of make a prediction about what you anticipate your study is going to be doing. Like, there will be no statistically significant difference between the study skills group and the control group for improving academic achievement. That might be like a null hypothesis that you might mention. So either studies that any study you come across, you might find that they just more so will just have a research question, or they might just have a hypothesis. And then we set up the method section. In the method section, most method sections begin with the participants, and I'm going to show you examples after this. I'm going to share a different screen in a second. But in the participant section, this is where you want to be really clear and concise of who's all involved. So this would include like, who are the participants of the study? How are they selected? How many participants make up the sample? Are there different groups of participants? For example, if you're doing an experimental design where you're comparing, one group to another group, let's say you're comparing, let's say you're doing a study on the effectiveness of a counseling intervention, and one group is receiving cognitive behavioral therapy, and another group is receiving solution-focused therapy. Now you've got two groups, right? So you would have to explain participants being, randomly assigned, if that's what you've chosen to do, to one or both groups. How many participants are in each group? What are the demographics of the sample, such as age, gender, ethnicity, region of residence, or other relevant characteristics? Also mentioned, that you went through the procedures of obtaining IRB approval. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an example of a methods section and how the participants section was written. I think that should be helpful. Stop share.
So this is Rebecca. I know I was running a couple minutes late while you're pulling that up. Did you have a preference as to if we have a question, just speak up, or
Oh,
would
yeah.
you prefer us to just type it in and let you respond when you see it?
Oh, no. Feel free to ask. Feel free to ask, because we're a pretty small group. It looks like Marcus has joined us, so that's great. So there's 3 of y'all. Thank you for joining us, Marcus. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. And could you share with us a little bit about your field of study?
Actually, I recently started my MBA program. I got a email, so I just signed up. So I hope it's okay to join in.
Of course. And remind me again, what was the program that say again, what is the program that you're in?
It's just an online MBA program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, what I'm going to be focusing on is really writing the methods section and the results section of a manuscript. And so most of my background and experience is in social science and counseling related research. And so now I'm sharing with y'all. Can y'all see my screen? Okay, great. So this is a study, the examination of treatment progress among college students in the university counseling program. And what I'm going to briefly do is just read you the abstract so that you get an idea of what the study was about. Then I'll jump to the methods section so you can see exactly what I wrote in the participant section, because you can see all those major areas are written. So this study evaluated an academic counseling program called the University Turnaround Program for college students experiencing mental health concerns and low academic achievement. 43, and here, you have to include the numbers, 27 men, 16 women, college students, range in age from 18 to 25 years old. Include the mean and standard deviation whenever you're reporting that. With 29 freshmen, 8 sophomores, and 6 juniors. So as much demographic information as you can in the abstract. This is a lot like the participant section in the methods section. And then, so I go over ethnicity, and then I go into my measures. Depression, generalized anxiety, and academic distress were measured on the CCAPS 34, and anxiety, concentration, and motivation, self-testing, and time management were measured on the LASI 3. I'll go into that on the instrumentation section, and what you include in the instrumentation section. Paired samples t-test, which is a type of analysis I ran, revealed statistically significant improvements for each measure that were characterized by medium to large effects. Effect size is a report of the magnitude of the difference between treatment effectiveness and between groups. So what we were attempting to do was a study that was looking at whether or not treatment was effective for one group of college students who were seeking mental health services. And so there was a pre-test, post-test administration of those 2 measures, the CCAPS and the LASI 3. So the CCAPS is the college counseling assessment of psychological functioning, and then the LASI 3 is the learning and attitude skills, study skills inventory. So we're measuring mental health symptoms on the CCAPS of college students, and we're measuring learning attitudes. So just so you get an idea of what we were doing, and the U-turn program was our intervention. We wanted to see if there was a change in these scores on the CCAPS and the LASI from pre-test to post-test. So that's why it's a within subjects group design. And so as you all go on, you'll learn a lot more too about different types of designs for your research study. So I'm going to skip the lit review, but I'm going to share with you one thing about the end of the lit review. Like I was saying before, at the end of a lit review, you usually get to the statement of the problem and the purpose statement. And then you may even then find yourself also asking the research question right before the methods section. So here it says, given the importance of college students receiving access to emotional and academic support, we examine the efficacy of an academic counseling program called the University Turnaround Program that was implemented to improve academic strengths, study strategies, and reduce mental health symptoms amongst college students attending a Hispanic serving institution. Our activities were guided by 2 research questions. So now we introduce the research questions that we're asking. So here we were saying, are there statistically, practically, and clinically significant differences in mental health related symptoms and self-reported learning and study skills following a targeted intervention between pre and post-test measures? So now with the methods section, this is the methods section, and it includes participant characteristics, our sampling procedures, our measurements of construct, our instrumentation, and it includes our procedure. We also included an intervention section because our study was involving an intervention. Not every study you will do will involve one. So you don't necessarily have to include this part. And then we have our data analysis plan, where we're also talking about preliminary analyses and our primary analyses. So all this is included before we get to the results section. So just kind of giving you a heads up about what is most likely to be included in the methods section for this type of design. I'm going to show you some other articles and how they structure theirs as well. So starting with the methods section now, we implemented a pre-test, post-test within subjects group design to determine the effectiveness of an academic recovery counseling program on reducing mental health symptoms and increasing learning and study strategies. I'm going to jump real quick to the presentation. I just want to make sure that y'all can see it. Do you all see the presentation now? Or do you still see the manuscript? Do you still see the article?
Yeah, it's not, it's just the article still.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, that's what I see as well.
Okay, that's fine. That's no problem. So essentially with the participants section, which we're going to get into, that'll be the thing that I'll share next. Okay. So going into the so the beginning of the method section really kind of introduces what you did. You could include your research question here, but most manuscripts that I've read, most articles that are published, have their research questions mentioned right before. And then beginning with participant characteristics, here we're talking about you know, our sample. So who are the participants of this study? They were 43, including 27 men, 16 women, college students attending a Hispanic serving institution of higher education in a rural South Central region of the United States. Now, the reason we say this is because you don't want to be too descriptive. You want to still protect your participants, right? You don't want to provide too much identifiable information. So you might say something like, at a setting, whatever setting you're talking about, in a South Central region of the United States. That's maybe like helpful enough to get a good idea of the demographic info and the location. Participants range in age from 18 to 25 years old, and so here you include the mean and standard deviation of your participant sample, and then any other demographic info. So we collected demographic info on age, gender. No, did we include age? Yeah, we did. Age, gender, ethnicity, and in this case, student classification. So if you can at least collect 3 to 4 variables, that would be very helpful for your participant characteristics. And then we go into our sampling procedure, and here is where we talk about how we, obtained IRB approval. Following IRB approval, convenience sampling. So here you talk about the type of sampling that you had. Most qualitative research studies might say like purposeful sampling because they have a real intention and purpose for the participant characteristics that they're reaching for. Convenience sampling often refers to like participants that were within reach that you could obtain. Because we wanted college students, these college students were within reach because they were sampled. Convenience sampling was conducted to recruit participants from the University Student Health and Wellness Center. So here we're giving a description of the location where we got our participants from, and specifically what they do at that location, which treats students with issues related to academic concerns, personal and mental health related issues, and alcohol and drug related dependence, codependence. Students were asked to participate in the research study following their admission into services at the University Student Health and Wellness Center. So they're gonna, like the editors of a journal, they're gonna wanna know, like, how did you recruit your participants, and what was the criteria to make them eligible for your study? So those are also really important things to consider. Any questions so far on participant, on that section of participants? Okay. So, and then same with location, it's a description of the setting where the data was collected. And so, you know, here's the thing about writing articles is the journals will have page limits, and you might want to initially include more info, right? But they'll limit you because you'll say, oh, you know, you can't, you're over our page limit, you can only include so much information. So you're going to find yourself making a lot of revisions and edits, and you're going to have to really choose, like, do I want to keep this or do I want to, you know, get rid of it? And what should I keep? What shouldn't I keep? So the PowerPoint that I have that's posted now online that I'm going to share again gives you the major areas to include, and same with you know, this manual, the APA Manual 7th edition. For those of you who have a different writing style in your field of study, look and see, you know, what examples there are for the methods section in those examples. So next, I'm going to jump to measures. So this is an important section. If you're going to include instruments, most quantitative research, right? We say quantitative because it's involving numbers. So most quantitative research is collecting data from some form of instrumentation. So in our case, in counseling, we were using instruments that measured various constructs. So we were measuring psychological symptoms amongst college students using the Counseling Center Assessment of Psychological Symptoms 34, the CCAPS 34. So that's a valid and reliable measure. And whenever you introduce an instrument in your instrumentation section or your measurements section, it's really important to talk about how many items are in the measure. So here we say a 34-item instrument used to assess counseling outcomes. So, you know, what is the constructs being measured? Counseling outcomes amongst college students. So this is the sample it was normed with. The instrument measures client functioning using a 5-point Likert scale. So explain the type of scales used in the instrument. So here, this instrument measured functioning in 8 major domains: depression, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, academic distress, eating concerns, family distress, hostility, and substance abuse, alcohol use. Other instruments may just measure one construct. This was like a battery measuring several constructs that converge into psychological symptoms. So this was a very comprehensive assessment. For 34 items, it's pretty comprehensive. It's gone through a lot of rigorous psychometric analyses to shorten the items to be valid and reliable with only 34 items, which is pretty cool. Next, included a sample of the questions asked. So it goes on to talk about, with higher scores indicating stronger evidence of decreased functioning, example items, including example items, like I am shy around others and my heart races for no good reason. Next, you want to talk about the psychometric properties. You want to talk about estimates of reliability and estimates of validity. So here we talk about it had fair to good internal consistency. That talks about the relationship of items within the instrument, ranging from 0.76 for academic distress to 0.89 depression. So the minimal, the smallest Cronbach's alpha coefficient was 0.76, and the largest was 0.89. And so we just included the range there. And then we talk about test-retest reliability coefficients, 0.79 for the alcohol use scale to 0.87 for depression. Include the citation for that. And it says within our sample, alpha coefficients range from 0.54 to 0.67. For this study, only subscales on depression, generalized anxiety, and academic distress were used. So we didn't use all the subscales in our study that this instrument uses. We only use the subscales that are mentioned here. One thing I want to say is that I remember one of the reviewers of the journal we submitted this to, this was published in the core journal, Counseling, Outcome, Research, and Evaluation. One of the reviewers wanted us to mention our samples' alpha coefficients to see if they were comparable to the normative sample. So that might be something that you might be asked, is to also find out what is the internal consistency of your sample using the Cronbach's alpha coefficient. The next instrument is which we included is the Lassie. And so same basic things we included again. The name, the author, how many items. It's a 10 scale, 60 item assessment. And here we talk about what it measures. Students' awareness about and use of learning and study strategies related to skill, will, and self-regulation components of strategic learning. By the way, if you're ever wondering, like, where do I find all this information? You can find this like on their manuals. Like if you're using an instrument, try to find their manual if you can obtain their manual. But you can find instrument reviews online. You can find instrument reviews like on the mental measurement yearbook database that we have in our library. So a lot of this information could also be found in some of the articles that were published on some of the articles some of the studies that were done to establish the psychometric properties of these instruments. So a lot of validation studies, instrument validation studies have this information as well. So the Lassie 3 provides standardized scores, percentile score equivalents, and national norms for 10 different scales. Here we talk about all the different scales that this one includes. It provides students with a summary of their strengths and weaknesses compared to other college students. Give examples of sample items. I concentrate fully when studying. And then other uses of the instrument. It provides feedback about opportunities for improvement. And then we go into the psychometric properties, reliability estimates here. Fair to good internal consistency, alpha coefficients, test-retest reliability, and convergent validity. And then we talk about our sample and how it compares to this instrument's normative group. And then these are the scales that we included in our study: the anxiety, time management, motivation, concentration, and self-testing instrument. Okay, and now in the procedure section, I'm gonna jump ahead and share my PowerPoint real quick, just so that you all can see it. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Oh, okay, so the procedures section, you know, it could come before the instrumentation section, or it can come after. I've seen examples of them coming one after the other. But this provides the reader with a detailed step-by-step guide to how the study was conducted. This is where you're talking about what you actually did. A lot of what you read in the IRB can fit in here. It describes precisely what was done and when, where, and how each step was completed. Includes how the participants were contacted, how informed consent and parental permission was addressed, how the instruments were administered, and in what order. Instructions that were given to the participants, how experimental conditions were manipulated. So let me share some examples of this one, of the procedures section now. So here we say participants received an informed consent form that explained the purpose of the study, their rights, confidentiality, and potential risks involved in the study, and agree to participate in the university counseling and the university turnaround program. Each client was given the CCAPS 34 and LASI 3 before the first intervention session and at the end of the last session. Other procedure sections might be a lot more thorough, but this was something that we didn't go into too much depth on. Here we talk about the intervention we did. Let me jump on another example real quick on the procedures section for another study. So this is another study where we looked at variables that can predict mental health amongst Latino college students. Okay, so here's the abstract to give you an idea of this kind of study, and I'll show you the procedures section in this one. So we use a bioecological framework useful to understand college students' mental health experiences. We use a quantitative predictive design, so we essentially did a regression analysis. A quantitative predictive design, which is a type of correlational study, to examine predictors of mental health. Participants included 143 Latino college students enrolled at a Hispanic serving institution. Using multiple regression analysis, findings indicated that college self-efficacy and search for meaning in life were significant predictors of life satisfaction. So let me just go into that part. Let me get past the lit review. Methods, here's our participants section. We include, age, gender, ethnicity, and generation status. Here's our measurement section. This measurement section is a little bit briefer. When we include the major things here, like examples of items, we also talk about reliability estimates, so that's good. As long as you can include those major things. Some editors, some reviewers, and editors might be a little bit more strict. But we included a lot more measures, so this section was longer. We had the Meaning in Life questionnaire, the college self-efficacy inventory, a measure of parental support using the social provision scale, a measure of peer support using the social provision scale, and a college student mentoring scale, and a campus satisfaction scale. And then we had the criterion variable was not life satisfaction, it was mental health. So all these other scales were serving as predictor variables, and then we had one criterion variable that we wanted to see if there's a prediction of mental health for these. And so we wanted to see what predicts mental health functioning. It'll make sense when I show you the results section. So here we say, we implemented several steps to gather data in the current study. First, we obtained permission from the IRB board. Second, we informed participants in large undergraduate courses that participation was voluntary. Participation would not affect their grade or affiliation with the university, and they had to be 18 years of age or older to participate. Finally, we distributed a packet to students that included a demographic form, survey instrument, and information regarding IRB approval. In this study, our method section is real brief. We don't even talk about really much about the analysis that we did here. We more so did that in the results. Let me see if I did it here in this study. Oops. This is essentially the same kind of study. So here we start with our participants section again. We talk about our measurements. And then here in the procedures section, we talk a lot about the same thing. We obtain permission from the IRB board. We obtain informed consents. They're given a packet with the following survey instruments. And then we go into our results. So it's probably because these journals were a little bit more strict. Let me show you some other examples. This is the same type of analysis, but this was by different authors, Dr. Stephen Lenz and Dr. Hollenbaugh. They were both, Dr. Hollenbaugh is a current faculty member in the counseling department. So here they were also doing a prediction study to see what particular aspects of an intervention were predictors of outcomes in anxiety and depression. That was also a regression study. In case you're wondering, again, regression attempts to see what variables can be predictors of a criterion. So does campus satisfaction, does peer support, does that predict mental health functioning? Like, you know, can we see a relationship there, and can we predict someone's mental health based off their ratings of peer support or campus satisfaction or meaning in life, those predictor variables. In this method section, they talk about how we implemented a secondary analysis of data from a single group, open trial of DBTA, which is their intervention, to identify the degree that the intervention's hypothesized mechanisms of change were associated with treatment gains across anxiety and depression. So they wanted to see if there were certain aspects of treatment that were predictors of change in those variables. So it's also the same type of analysis that the other ones were. And so here they give a really good description of participant characteristics. They have a really good description of measurements of constructs. They include the same important items as we mentioned. Here they have an interpersonal effectiveness scale, a distress tolerance scale that measures distress tolerance using the ways of coping checklist for DBT. They go into their intervention, and then here their procedure section is a little bit more robust than ours. Here they say the current data are associated with the primary analysis of DBTA, PHP evaluation, described by Delcont, Lenz, Hollenbaugh, and Callender. All participants completed treatment in the 7-week PHP, I think this stands for partial hospitalization program. So that's where the treatment was done in a partial hospitalization program, during which the admission process required completion of, and then here they abbreviate the instruments, which was again completed during a discharge interview. The 7-week duration of the program was established based on clinical experience of the program coordinator and the assumption that a minimum of 35 sessions, DBT adolescence lessons, were required to achieve desired therapeutic effect. Partial hospitalization program staff entered all data and participant information into a secure, encrypted, password-protected database using procedures consistent with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So continuing on after the procedures section, after just describing what they did, then you go into your data analysis section. And here they talk about establishing statistical power. Statistical power analysis is really important because that basically tells you a number of things. Whether or not the likelihood of finding statistical significant differences are actually there. So I'll explain more of those things in the results section, but here they say how they conducted an a priori power analysis. This is a specific power analysis to see if they have the right number of participants in their sample. You can use G-Power as a program that'll help you. It's a free program. Just look up G-Power and you can learn all about the different types of power analyses you can do for determining whether or not your sample size is adequate enough for your type of analysis you want to run. Some analyses require a certain number of participants, so keep that in mind. So here they talk about using G-Power 3 statistical power analysis program. This analysis revealed that a sample size of 55 was necessary to detect a median effect between our 4 predictor variables for estimating change among scores on the anxiety and depression scales. Given our sample of 66, we regard our results as defensible for extrapolating relationships between predictor and criterion variables within our sample. So preliminary analyses are often mentioned. This was an example of a type of preliminary analysis, but there's another section called preliminary analysis in this manuscript. And then here they talk about other things they had to do before they did their main analysis. They also say here, we use a series mean function. This is to clean up their data. So a lot of times your study might have missing variables. Maybe people miss responding scores. You know, they didn't respond to all the scores. So here it says, we use a series mean function in the statistical package for social sciences, SPSS. Always cite what data software you used to impute missing values within the raw data. And then they cite, you know that. Always cite what analyses you do. Values for predictor and criterion variables were computed by calculating the degree of treatment gain for each construct from admission determination using the intended therapeutic change to determine directionality. So they talk about really how they sort of set up their data in this type of analysis. Because they wanted to see a decrease in scores, they were basically saying how they used data that was collected from the time that they, it says, for example, the intent of treatment was to decrease scores on the anxiety scale. Therefore, a participant's admission score was subtracted from their discharge score. So they looked at scores from the admission to the discharge. So they included this in their preliminary analysis information. Talk about how they do this for all of the other constructs that they're measuring, all the other scales that they have. And then they talk about model assumptions. This is something you also want to mention, is the model assumptions in your analysis. This is what you would say in the preliminary analysis section. Multicollinearity is a model assumption for a regression. Multicollinearity among predictor variables was evaluated by inspecting bivariate correlations and variance inflation factors. Low to moderate intercorrelations among predictor variables and acceptable variance inflation factors emerging from our analysis suggested that predictive modeling with these variables was prudent. In my first example I shared with you, where I was doing a pre-test, post-test study on an intervention to see if it's effective for college students' mental health, I have also an example in the data analysis plan. We also did a statistical power analysis. We used G-power. We wanted to see what's an appropriate number of participants needed to establish statistical power for this research design. And we set power at the 0.80 level with the alpha level set to 0.05. The analysis suggested that a sample size of 27 was necessary to detect a medium effect of treatment. So we were good because I think we had 43. And then in our preliminary analysis, we say there were no missing values within the data. So we didn't have to do a series mean function or anything like that other example. We also say model assumptions, including normality and homogeneity of variances, were met. We didn't include the actual scores though. We just needed to make room for our manuscript to fit in the journal guidelines of page numbers. So a lot of things we omitted, but some journals will require you to include that stuff. And then in our primary analysis, this is before our main analysis. Oh no, this is our primary analysis now. This is like our main analysis. We say here 2 series of dependent samples t-tests were computed to assess the association of U-turn and the dependent variables over time. 1 series of t-tests were computed for mental health variables, depression, anxiety, academic distress, and another for the learning and study skills variables, anxiety, concentration, motivation, and self-testing and time management. Bonferroni corrections were made to account for the influence of increased type 1 error probability when making multiple comparisons. So here you would also address what did you do to deal with any potential error, anything that can maybe have a confounding effect on your analysis. What did you do to correct that? As a result, statistical significance tests for mental health and learning and study skills variables were interpreted at the 0.16 and 0.10 levels respectively. That's from the Bonferroni corrections. Here now we're talking about how did we estimate effect size. So again, in the primary analysis, we talk about what we did. 2 series of dependent samples t-tests. Dependent samples means that we were looking at comparing pre-test to post-test within the same group. If they were independent samples t-tests, these would be examples of looking at scores from separate participants, from completely separate groups. But because we had one group and we were looking at pre-test, post-test of that one group, that's why it's called a dependent samples t-test. So anyway, estimates of effect size, which is looking at the magnitude of the difference between the pre-test and the post-test, not whether or not there's a statistically significant difference, but what would the magnitude be if there was a difference. Estimates of effect size were computed using Cohen's d, which represents pre-post changes based on units of standard deviation using procedures described by Watson et al. Here we cite who we found. Always report statistical significance, effect size, and if you can also include like your power analyses like we talked about, and also your if you can also include like percent improvement. This is for a type of study that looks at change. So that would be other things you would include there. Here we also talk about what would be regarded as representing small, medium, or large effects. And so this is regarding effect size. And then we also talk about clinical significance, which was based off of calculations of percent improvement, which is really looking at the difference between the pre-test and the post-test divided by the pre-test, which is a really helpful sort of way of interpreting change. It's another helpful way of interpreting change between variables. So in the results section now, here we include a table. It's always helpful to include a table in your study. As you can see, what we found was that our U-turn intervention was effective for improving functioning in depression, reducing anxiety, reducing academic distress. We have a statistically significant difference, but we don't have. We have like it looks like medium effects, which is pretty good. But our percent improvement was low, so it's not considered clinically significant. Our percent improvement was really good, though, for some of these other variables on the Lassie scales. So here you can kind of see the table giving you a snapshot of that. So in the results section, this is where you got to study examples of other manuscripts. You got to study examples of other manuscripts for the type of analysis you did or you plan to do, and see the framework for how they framed their study. So in our results section, we begin by looking at changes in mental health symptoms over time. We talk about our paired samples t-test, which is the type of analysis we ran. Same thing as a dependent samples t-test. That's the same exact thing. Paired samples t-test and a dependent samples t-test are the same thing. Here we talk about across the participants on what scales for what variables. We talk about the Bonferroni correction again. Here now we say the results indicated that respondents' pre-test scores of the depression scale were decreased at post-test. And then here you give important info regarding your analysis. You would include the mean and standard deviation. You would include, like if you ran a t-test, you would have a t-score here. P is the probability value, so whether or not there was a statistically significant difference, and then what the effect size was. Any questions on this? I feel like I'm going really far. Am I losing anybody here? Does anybody have any questions so far on anything we've covered? Okay, and then here we would essentially write going on the same format. So here we talked about the depression scale, and now here we're going to talk about the generalized anxiety scale. We include the mean, standard deviation, what change did we see? We saw a decrease at post-test, and then we give the probability value. That means that there was a statistically significant difference. That means we're 99.9% confident that the difference in the pre-test to the post-test is not due to chance, but we're making inferences that it's because of the intervention. And then D is the estimate of effect size. So that's like a moderate effect. That's the magnitude of the difference. And then our percent improvement was 10.05. So clinically speaking, it's not too overwhelming, but there is a difference that was made. Interpretation of the related effect estimates was indicative of a medium effect, suggesting a change of 63% of a standard deviation unit. That's another way to interpret effect size for Cohen's D. And then we continue. And then here we talk about the Lassie and the changes that we saw in the Lassie. So for every type of analysis you're going to do, you're going to have different things you're going to include. Like in our regression examples, in the results section here, in the regression examples, here we say different things. This is where we're looking at predicting, right? We say descriptive statistics, including Pearson-R correlations, are included in Table 1. Results showed that college self-efficacy had a moderate correlation with mental health. And here we talk about R. So we have different sort of scores we're including in the interpretation. Suggesting that students with more college self-efficacy have better mental health. Search for meaning in life was inversely related with mental health. So the more you look for meaning in life, the lower your mental health level. Campus satisfaction was also positively correlated with mental health, suggesting that students with higher levels of campus satisfaction had stronger mental health. Mental health was considered, if it was a high score, it was considered good mental health. If it was a low score, it was considered poor mental health. And then here we talk again, we use multiple regression analysis to determine how individual, interpersonal, and institutional factors predict Latino college students' mental health. We talk about how the scores were normally distributed. After analyzing scatter plots, no curvilinear relationships between the criterion variable and predictor variables or heteroscedasticity were evident. These are things that could probably go into your methods section, in your primary analysis section, or preliminary analysis section, I should say. There was a statistically significant relationship between predictor variables. Here, this is what you would include. A medium effect size was noted. So it sounds similar to the other study I showed you. A lot of the same sort of format is used. And then we don't interpret our scores yet. We do more of that in the discussion section. In the results section, no matter what type of analysis you do, you just stick to the facts and you just include the information that's really, really important. So for the sake of time, I'm going to get back to the PowerPoint. I'm just going to review some things again. Okay. Okay. So with the results, this is included in the presentation because if you're doing a dissertation now, I was just showing you an article that's published in a journal. But if you're doing a dissertation, you might have to make a participant flow chart, which describes the progression of participants through each stage of the process, from sampling those individuals to whether or not they continued. So here's an example. It says, now a required part of research writing in most professional trade journals. So that's something that you might have to include as well. So here's an example of a flow chart often included in a dissertation. 3,357 patients with type 2 diabetes. 374 were excluded because of the inability to complete questionnaire. And then you go on to talk about those that were included. 2,286 eligible patients in primary care, 697 eligible patients in secondary care, and then how many of those refused to participate. So this is just an example of a flow chart. So keep that in mind. Ask your dissertation committee if you need to include one in your dissertation. So with the results of statistical and data analyses, this is where you actually report your actual findings, what statistical tests were run, and the results of these analyses. Include a summary of the statistical results like we showed. Include statistical significance, which is like P's less than 0.001. So include your probability value. Include your estimate of effect size, whether that's Cohen's D or eta squared, depending on the type of test you ran. Include something about power, whether or not you had power. That would probably be reported in your preliminary or primary analysis. And then in percent improvement, that would be good to include as well in your results section. And then you connect the findings with the stated research questions and illuminate if findings support or refute your hypotheses. And then your discussion sections where you really go on and interpret more of that, and you try to make inferences as to what that suggests and how that relates to the literature. So that's a lot more in depth, but this just kind of covers now in the preliminary analyses. You would talk about what you did about missing data, causes of missing data, what corrective actions you did. You know, in the examples we saw, there was a series mean function that was ran where a series mean was included in all those missing values. They basically calculated the mean of the scores and included that. That's what people sometimes do. Outliers, corrective actions for outliers. Did you assess model assumptions? Like we talked about multicollinearity, homogeneity of variance, normality. If there are any violations, did you correct those things? And then in your primary analysis, what did you do? A dependent samples t-test, a regression, a Pearson R for a correlational analysis. And then you would talk about, these essentially inferential statistics. You would talk more about like, effect size and things like that. Confidence intervals, that would be good to include as well. So other helpful tips, write in the first person and use past tense, follow an organized and logical manner, summarize your results, include all relevant findings, even findings that are not supportive of your hypotheses or maybe what you were hoping to find, so that there's no unbiased reporting. Include tables and figures. That would be like part of the results section, but usually it's included at the end of your manuscripts. Use previous researchers' work as a template. Follow their structure and framework. And of course, cite. If you're going to be citing, analyses you did, or if you're going to be running certain analyses or in certain interpretations of analyses, make sure you cite them. So that's essentially the presentation. I know I went a little bit over time, but does anybody have any questions? Check with your advisor, meet with your committee members, look up different examples related to your field of study, and just study the framework. If anything to take away from this presentation, just study the framework.
So this is Rebecca. I really appreciated your flow chart. I had been asked for one of those, and I really had no framework for what they were asking me for. So yours was a good example to help me make sense.
Yeah.
Of that.
Now you got an idea of essentially what they're asking, and this is great. It's really helpful to kind of get an idea of what processes and procedures were in place for you to obtain your participants, and then how many ended up agreeing to be a part of the study. So yeah, I'm glad. Well, that's all I have. Feel free to contact me. My email, I can put it in the chat. If you have any questions, I'm happy to share any resources.
And I do just want to let everyone know I have recorded this session, and I also have this PowerPoint, and it's already on our website. So if you did want to go back and review things like the flow chart or any of the material that was covered today, that will all be on our website. And I'll post that in the chat box as well. I'm also going to post an evaluation for this presentation. So if you could just take 1 or 2 minutes to fill it out, just to let us know how we did today. I know things are a little bit different virtually for us, so we want to make sure that we're providing you resources that y'all find helpful. Awesome.
So can I ask a question that's not directly related to like the topic, but I was really intrigued by the couple of examples you showed where you had that sentence about the clinical efficacy versus the statistical significance, and citation for the clinical significance seemed to be fairly new. Is that something new in your field that people are starting to work with?
Yes. In fact, there's a special edition in the core journal where this was published, where the editor wanted to have research studies that also presented examples of reporting the clinical significance, where we were reporting percent improvement. And so that's something that our field has been moving towards as well, in addition to the traditional statistical significance and effect size.
Okay, yeah, I just found that interesting. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming. I know things are a little hectic right now, and I'm sure you stare at your screen all day. So thank you for sharing some more of your screen time with us. And I did post the link to our website so you can review all this material. And if you have any questions, definitely let us know. But thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you so much for